I realized something was wrong the moment I was copied on an email that wasn't meant for me. It wasn't dramatic. No insults. No threats. Just a casual thread between my manager and someone else, my friend, discussing my performance as if I weren't a real person, as if I were a problem they were quietly trying to manage out of the room. The tone was polite, strategic, final, and at the bottom of the chain was her new signature line. The title she'd just been promoted into. That's when it hit me. Not that she'd been promoted. I'd known that was coming. It was the way my name was being used now. Flattened, reduced, turned into a liability. I stared at the screen for a long time before I closed my laptop, because once I acknowledged it, I knew I wouldn't be able to pretend things were still normal. Before I go any further, hello family, please hit that subscribe button, like, and tell us where you are watching from. Let's continue. A few months earlier, everything had felt different. We'd walked into that interview together, joking in the elevator about how stiff the receptionist looked and how we hoped we wouldn't be seated next to each other during the panel. We were nervous in the same way, excited in the same way. Two women trying to break into a company that had a reputation for being selective and brutal. When we both got the offer calls, I screamed so loud my neighbor knocked on my door. She cried. We met that night for drinks and talked about how crazy it was that we'd actually pulled it off. Same company, same start date, different roles, but close enough that we'd be working together on projects. For the first year, it felt like we were surviving the place together. We ate lunch at the same time. We complained about the same things. We stayed late on the same nights. When one of us got praised in a meeting, the other would text afterward and say, "You killed that." When one of us messed up, the other would help clean it up quietly. I trusted her, not just as a coworker, as someone who knew how hard I worked, someone who knew what I'd sacrificed to be there, someone who had seen me cry in the bathroom once after a meeting went badly and had handed me a paper towel and said, "You're not crazy. They're like this to everyone." So when she started getting more attention from leadership, I wasn't bitter. I was proud. I'd seen how sharp she could be in meetings, how easily she spoke, how comfortable she was taking up space. I knew she wanted more responsibility. When she told me she was being considered for a promotion, I helped her prep for the interview. We ran through questions. I gave feedback on her presentation deck. The day she got it, I hugged her in the hallway. I told her she deserved it. I meant it. The change didn't happen all at once. That's the part people don't understand when I try to explain it later. There wasn't a switch that flipped. There were tiny shifts, small corrections, subtle distances. The first thing I noticed was that she stopped looping me into conversations we used to have together. Decisions we used to make side by side were suddenly already made when I heard about them. When I asked questions, she'd say things like, "Oh, I assumed you knew," or "That was above your scope now." Above my scope. That phrase started showing up everywhere. At first, I laughed it off. She was new to managing. Maybe she was just trying to prove herself. Maybe she was stressed. I didn't want to be the friend who couldn't handle her friend leveling up. But then came the meetings. She'd schedule them without asking my availability, then note my absence in follow-up emails. She'd reframe my ideas in front of others, slightly adjusting the language, just enough that it sounded like her contribution instead of mine. If I spoke up to clarify, she'd smile and say, "Right, that's what I was getting at," and move on. It was subtle enough that no one else reacted. Too subtle to call out without sounding paranoid. Once, during a team sync, she pulled up a slide I had worked on for weeks. She changed one line, one sentence, and then she said, "I had to clean this up a bit before sharing with leadership." I remember the way my face burned, not because of what she said, but because of how casually she said it, like it was obvious, like it was expected. After the meeting, I asked her about it. I kept my voice light. I told her it caught me off guard. She sighed, not angrily, patiently, like I was a child who didn't understand something simple. She said leadership expected polish at this level. that I needed to stop taking things personally, that she was just doing her job now. That was the first time she said now, the way people do when they're drawing a line between who they were and who they've become. From then on, my days started feeling heavier. Tasks I used to own were reassigned without explanation. Deadlines shifted without warning. Feedback came late, vague, and always written instead of spoken. If I asked for clarification, she'd take days to respond. Sometimes she wouldn't respond at all, and then I'd get copied on a thread where she'd already escalated the issue. The worst part wasn't even the work. It was the humiliation wrapped in professionalism. She'd correct me in front of others, but always gently, always with a smile. She'd say things like, "Let's circle back offline," but then never schedule the offline conversation. She'd praise the team collectively, then single me out privately for patterns she couldn't quite define. I started second-guessing myself, rereading emails before sending them, saving drafts, keeping notes. I told myself I was being dramatic, that this was just how corporate environments worked. But then people started treating me differently. Colleagues who used to ask for my input stopped coming by my desk. Someone I'd mentored started going to her instead. In meetings, when I spoke, eyes flicked toward her, waiting for confirmation before anyone reacted. One afternoon, I overheard my name in the kitchen. Not loudly, not maliciously, just enough to know I wasn't imagining things. "She's struggling," someone said. "I think the role might be too much for her." I stood there, holding a mug I didn't even want, realizing that a story was being told about me without my participation. I tried to address it directly. I asked for a one-on-one. I prepared notes. I told her I felt sidelined, that I wanted clearer expectations, that I felt like our communication had changed. She listened. She nodded. She took notes. Then she told me she was concerned about my defensiveness, that I seemed resistant to feedback, that she'd noticed I was less collaborative lately, that maybe I was having trouble adjusting to the new structure. The conversation ended with her saying she wanted to support me, but that I needed to show growth. I walked back to my desk feeling smaller than I had in years. From that point on, everything she did had plausible deniability. Missed credit, oversight, delayed feedback, busy schedule, public corrections, transparency, private criticism, coaching. I considered going to HR, but every example I had sounded petty when I said it out loud. And she was careful. There was always a paper trail, always a justification. She was building a case, and I was reacting instead of preparing. The night I got that email, the one where I was copied accidentally, I finally saw the outline of it. Phrases like performance trajectory and risk mitigation. Discussions about my fit. No mention of my workload. No mention of the changes she'd made. Just conclusions. I closed my laptop and sat there, trying to understand how someone who used to split fries with me after work had become the person quietly deciding my future without me in the room. The next morning, I walked into the office knowing something was coming. I didn't know what it would be. A formal warning, a performance plan, a conversation that would change everything. But I knew one thing for sure. Whatever she had started, she wasn't done yet. The meeting invite came at 9:12 a.m. No subject line, just a calendar block labeled check-in. 30 minutes. Her name. HR added as optional. Optional HR is never optional. I stared at it longer than I should have. Long enough for the little notification sound to feel accusatory. Long enough to imagine 10 different versions of how the conversation would go. Long enough to know that whatever I said in that room wouldn't matter as much as what had already been written about me. I accepted the invite. Declining would have looked defensive. Asking what it was about would have looked anxious. Silence was safer. The rest of the morning moved strangely. People smiled at me, but their eyes didn't stay. Conversations stopped when I walked by. My inbox was quiet in a way that didn't feel like relief. It felt like being removed from circulation. When it was time, I went to the conference room early. She came in exactly on time, coffee in hand, laptop under her arm. HR followed a minute later, cheerful in that way that makes everything worse. She asked how I was doing. I said I was fine. That was the last normal sentence of the meeting. She started with concern. That word came up a lot. Concern about my output. Concern about missed expectations. Concern about alignment. She spoke calmly, confidently, like she'd rehearsed this version of herself in the mirror. She referenced documents I'd never seen, feedback I hadn't received, deadlines that had apparently shifted without me noticing. I interrupted once, just once. I said I didn't recognize some of what she was describing. She tilted her head slightly and said, "This is what I mean." HR scribbled something. By the end of it, I had a performance improvement plan, 30 days, clear goals, measurable outcomes, weekly check-ins, support resources. On paper, it was fair, generous even. In reality, it was a countdown. After the meeting, she pulled me aside. Not HR, just her. She said she hoped this wouldn't affect our friendship. She said she hated being in this position. She said she was rooting for me. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. The next 4 weeks were a blur of effort and erasure. I worked harder than I ever had. I documented everything. I followed up on every conversation with an email. I asked for clarification even when it made me feel small. I hit every metric on that plan, sometimes more than required. And still, every check-in ended the same way. Progress acknowledged. But, yes, you completed the task, but the approach wasn't strategic. Yes, you met the deadline, but leadership expectations are evolving. Yes, the work was solid, but the communication could be stronger. The word, but became a wall I couldn't get past. She started scheduling my check-ins at the end of the day, Friday afternoons, times when people were already mentally gone. HR stopped attending after the first 2. Once, I asked if we could move one earlier. She said her calendar was full. I saw her laughing with someone at her desk an hour later. I started having trouble sleeping. Not dramatic insomnia, just the kind where your body rests, but your mind keeps working through conversations that already happened, trying to find the exact moment you went wrong. I stopped eating lunch with anyone. I didn't want to be seen complaining, or worse, begging for validation. Then the small humiliations escalated. She forwarded an email I'd written to the team, correcting my phrasing in line before anyone could respond. She asked me to observe meetings I used to lead. She reassigned a project I was proud of to someone else, CC'ing me on the handoff with a note that said, "Given current priorities." Current priorities never included me anymore. I thought about quitting, a lot, but leaving would have meant she was right, that I couldn't handle it, that the story she was telling would become the official version. So I stayed. One afternoon, a coworker I trusted pulled me aside. She didn't say much, just that she'd heard things, that my name was coming up in rooms I wasn't in, that maybe I should be careful. Careful how, I didn't know. The 30 days ended with another meeting. Same room, same setup. This time HR was back. She said there had been improvement. She said she appreciated my effort. She said leadership still had concerns. The plan was extended. Another 30 days. That's when something in me shifted. Not anger, not resolve, just clarity. She wasn't trying to help me improve. She was trying to exhaust me until I removed myself. And I realized something else. She was nervous. I started noticing it in small ways. How she overexplained decisions involving me. How she avoided eye contact when discussing my work. How she asked HR hypothetical questions that seemed rehearsed. She wasn't just managing me. She was managing risk. So I stopped reacting and started watching. I noticed how often she contradicted herself, how timelines changed depending on the audience, how she claimed ownership of decisions she'd previously blamed on leadership. I started keeping my own records. Not emotional ones. Factual ones. Dates. Times. Attachments. I noticed she treated others differently. Junior employees were protected. Senior ones were appeased. I was the exception. The cautionary tale. One evening, as I was packing up, I saw an email come through. Sent to her. From her manager. It mentioned restructuring. My name was in it. Not as a lead. Not as a contributor. As a variable. I didn't forward it. I didn't respond. I just sat there, understanding that whatever was coming next wouldn't be subtle anymore. The next week, she asked me to join a realignment discussion. This time, HR wasn't optional, and neither was the outcome. The realignment discussion was scheduled for 8:30 a.m., which felt intentional. Early enough that I wouldn't have time to talk myself out of it. Early enough that the office still smelled like cleaning solution and burnt coffee. I got there first again. Same chair, same wall screen, same glass table that showed fingerprints no matter how often it was wiped down. She came in with HR and someone I hadn't met before. Older. Calm. Introduced as supporting leadership alignment. No title that meant anything concrete, which somehow made it worse. They didn't ask how I was doing this time. She started by thanking me for my effort over the last 2 months. She said it had been noted. Then she said the team was evolving, that the company was shifting priorities, that roles needed to adapt. I already knew where this was going. She said my current role no longer aligned with business needs. She said they wanted to explore alternatives. The alternatives were worse than leaving. A lateral move to a department I had no experience in. No growth path. No visibility. Framed as an opportunity. Explained as flexibility. Presented like a favor. I asked if the performance plan had been completed successfully. She said yes. I asked why the role still wasn't a fit. She said fit wasn't just about performance. I asked what it was about. She said it was complex. That was when I finally looked directly at her. She didn't look back. HR jumped in, smoothing things over, talking about support, about transition timelines, about how common this was. Common. Like I was replaceable. Like this wasn't personal. I asked for time to think. They gave me 48 hours. When the meeting ended, she stayed behind again. HR left. The support person left. It was just us. She said this was hard for her too. I didn't respond. She said she hoped I understood that she had to make decisions for the team. I asked her when she decided I wasn't part of it. She paused. Just a second. Long enough to register. Then she said she didn't appreciate my tone. I walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. The 48 hours were unbearable. I replayed everything. Every conversation. Every meeting. Every moment where I'd trusted her. I looked at the offer letter for the alternative role and felt something close to panic. Accepting it would mean starting over under someone else. Branded as difficult, quietly pushed aside. Declining it would mean leaving without severance. I talked to no one. Not friends. Not family. I didn't want opinions. I wanted facts. So I went back through everything. Emails. Calendar invites. Performance documents. Feedback summaries. That's when the pattern became undeniable. She had been documenting me from the moment she was promoted. Not neutrally. Selectively. Anything that went wrong was logged. Anything that went right was attributed to team effort or left out entirely. I found instances where deadlines had been changed after the fact, where expectations were revised retroactively, where I'd been given direction verbally, then criticized later for not following written guidance that didn't exist at the time. None of it was dramatic on its own. Together, it was a narrative, and it wasn't mine. I requested a meeting with HR alone. They agreed. The HR rep listened carefully as I walked through everything. She nodded. She took notes. She asked clarifying questions. When I finished, she said she appreciated my perspective. She also said this was complicated. She said intent was hard to prove. She said management had discretion. She said documentation mattered. I told her I had documentation. Her tone shifted slightly. I forwarded everything. She said she'd review it. A day passed. Then two. Then I got an email asking to extend the 48-hour deadline. That told me everything I needed to know. They were nervous now. Not about fairness. About exposure. I didn't accept the alternative role. I didn't decline it either. I asked for clarity. That was when things started changing. Meetings were postponed. Decisions were delayed. Language became careful, vague. She stopped speaking about me in absolutes. She stopped scheduling one-on-ones. I noticed she started CCNG more people on emails involving me. Legal-sounding people. Compliance-sounding people. I noticed she stopped correcting me publicly. I noticed she avoided me entirely. The office atmosphere shifted. Subtly. People who'd avoided me before started making eye contact again. Someone asked my opinion in a meeting and didn't look to her for approval afterward. It was like a fog lifting, just enough to notice it had been there. Then one morning, I was called into a different conference room. Not the usual one. HR was there. Her manager was there. She wasn't. They told me they were reviewing leadership processes within the team, that some concerns had been raised, that they wanted my input. They asked me to speak freely. So I did. I kept it factual, calm, precise. I talked about inconsistencies, about shifting expectations, about communication gaps, about how power dynamics can quietly distort reality. They didn't interrupt. When I finished, her manager asked a question that caught me off guard. Did you ever feel retaliated against? I didn't answer right away. Then I said yes. The meeting ended without conclusions, but when I left, my hands were shaking. That afternoon, she finally came to my desk. She smiled, tight, controlled. She said we needed to talk. I followed her into a small room near the back of the floor. No glass walls, no screen. She closed the door, and for the first time since all of this started, she dropped the professional tone. She asked me what I was doing. I asked her what she meant. She said I was creating problems, that I was overreacting, that I was putting her in a difficult position. I told her I was just telling the truth. She laughed. Once. Short. She said I should be careful, that leadership had long memories, that this industry was smaller than I thought. That was when I understood something I hadn't let myself see before. This wasn't about performance. It wasn't about fit. It was about control, and she was losing it. As I walked back to my desk, I saw an email notification pop up on my screen. Sent to all hands. From her manager. It announced an upcoming organizational update, scheduled for the end of the week. And this time, I had a feeling my name wouldn't be the only one on the table. The organizational update was scheduled for Friday at 4 p.m., which told me exactly how much they wanted people paying attention. End of week, end of day, when everyone's already thinking about leaving. I tried to act normal for the rest of the week. Answer emails, attend meetings, pretend my stomach didn't tighten every time a new calendar invite came through. She avoided me completely. No eye contact, no messages, no casual comments, dropped into conversations like she used to do when she wanted to remind me who had the upper hand. It was quiet, too quiet. By Wednesday, people were whispering again, but this time it felt different. Less about me, more about her. Someone mentioned leadership reviews. Someone else said they'd seen legal on our floor twice in one day. Another person joked that reorg season was starting early this year. She stayed late every night. I could see her office light on when I left. Once I walked past and heard her on the phone. Voice low, sharp, defensive. When she noticed me, she turned away. On Thursday afternoon, HR asked if I'd be available for a quick follow-up conversation the following Monday, after the update. I didn't ask why. Friday came faster than I wanted it to. The all-hands invite was sent out again that morning with a reminder to attend. Camera optional. questions to be submitted in advance. I sat at my desk at 3:58 p.m., laptop open, hands folded, waiting. People trickled into the call. Some turned cameras on. Most didn't. Her manager joined. Then his manager. HR, legal. She joined last. Her camera was off. Her manager started speaking about company values, about accountability, about transparency, about growth. I'd heard these speeches before, usually right before someone got quietly removed. Then he started talking about leadership responsibility, about how promotions weren't just about results, but about how those results were achieved, about trust. My heart didn't race. It slowed. He said they'd conducted an internal review. That feedback had been collected from multiple sources. That patterns had emerged. He didn't say her name at first. Then he did. He said she would be stepping down from her current role effective immediately. The call stayed silent. No one gasped. No one reacted. Just a strange, heavy pause where everyone processed what they were allowed to feel. He said she would be transitioning to an individual contributor role on a different team, pending further evaluation. Pending further evaluation sounded temporary, like a holding cell. Her camera stayed off. He said leadership changes were never easy, but necessary. Then he moved on. No mention of me. No mention of our team. No explanation beyond that. The meeting ended at 4:27 p.m. People logged off quickly. I sat there, staring at my reflection in the dark screen, not sure what I was supposed to feel. Relief didn't come right away. Neither did satisfaction. What came first was a kind of emptiness. An hour later, she messaged me. Just one line. "Can we talk?" I didn't respond. I packed my bag and left the office without looking back. That weekend felt unreal, like the tension that had been holding everything together finally snapped, and my body didn't know how to exist without it. I slept too much, then not at all. I replayed the call over and over, trying to catch some hidden detail that explained everything. Monday morning, HR followed through. They asked how I was feeling. I said I was fine. They said they were sorry for my experience. They said they appreciated my professionalism. They said my role was secure. They said they were assigning me a new manager. They said they hoped I'd rebuild trust in the organization. I nodded through all of it. They didn't ask if I wanted to press a complaint. They didn't ask if I felt harmed. They didn't ask if I thought she should face further consequences. They just wanted closure. I went back to my desk afterward and found an envelope waiting for me. No return address, just my name. Inside was a handwritten note. Her handwriting. It said she never meant for things to go this far, that she felt threatened, that she panicked, that she thought if she didn't act first, she'd lose everything. It said she hoped one day I'd understand. I stared at it for a long time before folding it back into the envelope and putting it in my drawer. I didn't respond. The new manager was different. Careful. Measured. He asked questions. He listened. He didn't talk over me. He gave feedback that made sense. But the damage didn't disappear just because she was gone. People still hesitated around me, like I was fragile or dangerous. Some avoided me completely. Others tried too hard to be nice. The narrative had shifted, but it hadn't vanished. A week later, I heard she'd started telling her version of the story, that she'd been undermined, that she'd been targeted, that she'd been made an example of, that I'd gone behind her back. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't defend myself. I was tired. Then, one afternoon, I got an email from legal. They wanted to schedule a formal interview. Not HR, not leadership. Legal. Subject line. Confidential. Follow-up. I closed my laptop slowly, feeling that familiar weight settle back in. Because whatever this was, it wasn't over. And this time, it wasn't just about her. It was about what the company was willing to admit. The legal interview was scheduled for Tuesday morning, and unlike every other meeting I'd been dragged into over the past few months, this one came with instructions. Do not discuss with colleagues. Do not forward materials. Do not record. That alone told me this wasn't about resolution. It was about containment. The conference room they chose was on a different floor, one I'd never had a reason to visit before. No team names on the doors. No familiar faces walking by. Just quiet and a kind of corporate sterility that made everything feel deliberate. 2 lawyers were there. One internal, one external. They introduced themselves, explained confidentiality, and reminded me I wasn't required to answer anything I didn't feel comfortable answering. Then they started asking very specific questions. When did I first notice changes in her behavior? Did I ever feel pressured to change my work product after her promotion? Were there instances where I felt my performance was misrepresented? Had she ever made comments that felt threatening or coercive? Had I ever been discouraged from going to HR? They weren't asking how I felt. They were building a timeline. I answered carefully, not defensively, not emotionally, just truthfully. Dates, words, actions. Every time I mentioned an email, they asked if I still had it. Every time I mentioned a meeting, they asked who else was present. Every time I described a decision, they asked who initiated it. Halfway through, the external lawyer stopped me and asked a question that made my throat tighten. Did you believe she was acting independently or following direction? I didn't answer right away, because that question changed everything. Until that moment, I'd framed this as a betrayal between 2 people, a friendship gone wrong, power gone to someone's head. But now I had to consider something else. I said I didn't know. I said I suspected she felt pressure to deliver results quickly. I said leadership rewarded aggression. I said there were moments where it felt like she was being backed, even when her reasoning didn't make sense. They nodded. They wrote things down. When the interview ended, they thanked me. They said they might have follow-up questions. They reminded me not to discuss the conversation. Then they asked one last thing, if I'd be willing to review documents later for accuracy. That was when I realized this wasn't an internal cleanup. This was preparation. For what? I didn't know yet. Back at my desk, I tried to work. I really did. But every email felt heavier. Every Slack message felt loaded. I couldn't stop thinking about that question. Was she acting alone? Or had she just been the visible part of something bigger? Over the next few days, subtle things started happening. Leadership became more distant. Meetings were shorter. Decisions were deferred. The phrase "under review" started appearing everywhere. I noticed my new manager getting pulled into closed-door meetings more often. He stopped giving me timelines. He avoided committing to anything in writing. Once, I overheard him on a call saying, "I understand the concern, but we're still assessing exposure." Exposure. That word followed me home. Then the document requests started. Legal emailed asking for copies of specific emails, performance feedback drafts, calendar notes, Slack messages. They weren't fishing. They knew what they wanted. And the more I sent, the clearer it became that her actions hadn't happened in a vacuum. There were approvals, acknowledgments, leadership responses that at best looked negligent, at worst complicit. I started recognizing names in CC lines, executives who had nodded along, managers who had stayed silent, HR reps who had closed tickets without resolution. The story wasn't just about one person abusing power. It was about how easy it was for her to do it. That's when the tone toward me shifted again. Not hostile, careful. People chose their words around me. Emails became overly polite. Compliments felt performative. I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was a risk factor. One afternoon, HR asked if I'd consider taking some time off. Framed as support. Suggested gently. Encouraged even. I said no. The next day, my access to certain systems was delayed. Just for a few hours. They said it was a technical issue. It happened again the following week. I documented it. I stopped assuming good faith. Then I heard she was talking to a lawyer. Not company legal. Her own. That's when the messages started coming in from people I hadn't heard from in months. Former coworkers asking how I was. Old managers checking in. One person even apologized vaguely for not stepping in sooner. No one said her name. No one said what they knew. They were testing the water, seeing how much I'd say. I said nothing. Late one evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice came through, shaky, controlled, angry under the surface. She said I'd gone too far. She said she'd tried to fix things quietly. She said I was ruining her career. She said none of this would have happened if I'd just accepted the alternative role. I deleted the voicemail without replying. The next morning, legal emailed again. Subject line: escalation. They wanted to meet. This time, not just to ask questions. This time, they wanted to walk me through findings. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Because whatever they'd found, it was big enough that they couldn't handle it quietly anymore. And once that door opened, there was no going back. The escalation meeting wasn't on my calendar. It showed up as a direct message from legal asking if I could step into a room immediately. No buffer, no warning, just urgency. I followed the directions they sent and ended up in a small conference room near the executive offices. The kind with thicker walls and no windows. The kind people don't wander into by accident. This time there were 3 people waiting. Legal, HR, and someone from leadership I'd only seen on town halls. They didn't ask me to sit. They thanked me for coming and closed the door. The legal lead spoke first. She said they wanted to walk me through preliminary findings related to the internal review. She emphasized the word preliminary like a shield. Then she said something I hadn't expected. They had identified systemic process failures, not individual misconduct. Systemic. She said the review had expanded beyond my situation, that other cases had surfaced, similar patterns, different teams, different managers, same behaviors, quiet sidelining, performance narratives shaped after decisions were already made. HR involvement used as documentation, not intervention. She didn't say my situation caused this. She said it revealed it. I felt dizzy, not from shock, but from how carefully everything was being framed. HR jumped in, talking about commitment to change, about listening, about learning. Leadership talked about trust, about the importance of psychological safety. Then legal came back in. She said there were concerns about retaliation. She said the company took those concerns seriously. She said they wanted to ensure I felt protected. Protected? I asked what that meant. They said it meant no adverse action related to my role, that my performance record would be reviewed independently, that any documentation created under my former manager would be reassessed. Reassessed how, I didn't ask. They said it also meant confidentiality. They wanted assurance that I wouldn't discuss internal matters externally, not just with the press, with anyone. I asked if they were asking me to sign something. They said not yet. That came later. When the meeting ended, they told me someone would follow up with next steps. They didn't say when. I went back to my desk feeling like the ground had shifted again, but this time under the entire company, not just me. Over the next 2 weeks, nothing happened. No announcements. No updates. No visible changes. But beneath the surface, everything slowed down. Projects stalled. Decisions got stuck in review cycles. Leaders deferred responsibility. People stopped volunteering opinions in meetings. Everyone felt it. I noticed my new manager avoiding eye contact again, not out of discomfort with me, but with the situation, like he didn't know where to stand. Then one morning I logged in and saw my calendar blocked for an entire afternoon. Subject: legal review. Participation required. I didn't have to ask what it was. This time they showed me documents. Redacted but familiar. Emails I'd been on. Threads I hadn't. Notes from meetings I'd never been invited to. They pointed out discrepancies. Statements made about my performance that didn't align with deliverables. feedback attributed to stakeholders who denied giving it, language that suggested decisions were already made before HR processes began. They didn't accuse anyone by name. They didn't need to. Then they showed me something that made my stomach drop. An internal message from her to leadership, sent weeks after her promotion. In it, she described me as a risk to team stability. She suggested proactive measures. She framed it as protection. And someone had replied, approved. That was the moment I stopped seeing her as the center of this. She hadn't invented the system. She'd learned how to use it. Legal asked if I recognized the message. I said yes. They asked if I felt it misrepresented me. I said yes. They asked if I believed it influenced decisions about my role. I said yes. They asked if I'd be willing to attest to that if needed. I hesitated. Then I said yes. The room went quiet. Afterward, they reminded me again about confidentiality. They told me they were assessing options. Options was a loaded word. That afternoon, I got an email from HR with a subject line that made my chest go cold. Separation considerations. They said it was informational, that it didn't indicate intent, that it was standard in situations involving extended review. They attached a document outlining voluntary exit packages. It was generous, too generous. That night I didn't sleep, because I understood what they were doing now. They weren't trying to punish her. They weren't trying to fix the system. They were trying to close the loop, quietly, and I was standing in the middle of it. The next morning, I replied to HR. I said I wasn't interested in discussing separation at this time. Within an hour, legal messaged me directly. They asked if I had a moment to talk. I said yes. They called. The tone was different this time, less formal, more careful. They said they wanted to be transparent. They said things were moving faster than expected. They said external counsel had been brought in. They said there was concern about escalation beyond the company. Then they said the sentence that made everything feel suddenly fragile. There is a possibility this becomes a formal matter. I asked what that meant. They said it could involve regulatory review, or litigation, or both. They said my cooperation was appreciated. They said my discretion was critical. They said they'd be in touch. When the call ended, I sat there, hands in my lap, realizing that the story I'd been living quietly was no longer just mine. It was becoming something public. And once that happened, no one would be able to control how it ended. The first sign that things were no longer contained came from outside the building. A journalist emailed the company's general inbox, asking for comment on internal leadership concerns. No names, no details, just enough to trigger panic. By the time that email made its way to my level, it had already been forwarded, dissected, and flagged by at least 4 departments. Legal went quiet. HR went silent. Leadership stopped sending anything in writing. And suddenly, people started talking to me again. Not openly, not directly, just small, careful check-ins. Hey, how are you holding up? Let me know if you need anything. This place has been a lot lately. No one said why. I started noticing how often my name came up in rooms I wasn't in. I could feel it in the pauses when I joined calls, in the way conversations shifted mid-sentence, in how people avoided saying certain phrases around me, like they were afraid of activating something. I wasn't a person anymore. I was context. Legal scheduled another interview. This one was longer, more formal, recorded. They warned me ahead of time. They said my statements could be referenced in future proceedings. They asked if I wanted counsel present. That question sat between us, heavy. I said no. The interview started with basics, confirmation of dates, roles, reporting lines. Then it moved into intent. Did I believe her actions were deliberate? Did I believe leadership knew? Did I believe the company had failed to protect me? I answered carefully, honestly, without exaggeration. I said what I knew. I said what I suspected. I said what I couldn't prove. They didn't push me to speculate. They let silence do the work. At the end, They asked me if I'd experienced any direct retaliation since raising concerns. I thought about the system access issues, the suggestion to take time off, the separation document. I said yes. They asked for specifics. I gave them dates. When it was over, they thanked me again. They told me I'd been clear, that my cooperation mattered. They didn't say what would happen next. That afternoon, HR finally asked me to meet with them again. This time, they didn't bring up separation. They brought up support. They asked if I felt safe at work. I said physically yes. They asked if I felt comfortable continuing in my role. I paused. Then I said I didn't know. They nodded like they expected that answer. They told me they were implementing interim reporting changes, that my work would temporarily bypass my former manager's chain entirely. They told me it was for my protection. It felt like isolation. Then they asked if I'd had any contact with her since the voicemail. I said no. They asked if she'd contacted me again. I said no. They asked if I had reached out to anyone outside the company about what happened. I said no. They didn't ask again. That same week, she officially left the company. No announcement, no farewell email, no acknowledgement. Her profile disappeared from the directory overnight. Someone said she was on leave. Someone else said she'd resigned. Someone else said she'd been terminated quietly. No one knew for sure. What I did know was that she was talking. I started hearing about it through third parties, mutual contacts, industry acquaintances, people who'd heard her version before they heard mine. She said she'd been scapegoated, that she'd been thrown under the bus to protect higher-ups, that she'd tried to raise concerns about me and been punished for it. She said I was manipulative, that I'd played the system better than she had. That hurt more than I expected. Not because it was true, but because it was effective. People love a fallen manager story, especially one that shifts blame upward and sideways at the same time. Legal asked me about it. They asked if I'd been contacted by anyone asking for my version. I said no. They asked if I planned to share my story publicly. I said no. They asked if I'd consider signing a confidentiality agreement. I asked what it would include. They said it would limit my ability to discuss internal matters indefinitely. They said it would come with compensation. They didn't say how much. I asked for time to think. They agreed. That weekend, I met up with a former coworker for coffee, someone who'd left months earlier. She looked at me and said, "I'm not surprised." I asked what she meant. She told me about her own experience. Different manager, same patterns. Quiet marginalization, performance issues that appeared out of nowhere, HR meetings that went nowhere. She said she'd thought she was alone. She said she'd blamed herself. I listened, realizing how many versions of the story were out there, never told because each person thought it was just them. On Monday morning, legal sent me a draft agreement. It was thorough, restrictive, final. In exchange, there was a number attached that made my hands go cold. It was more than I'd make in a year, more than enough to walk away cleanly, more than enough to forget. They framed it as resolution, closure, a chance to move forward without carrying this with me. I sat there for a long time, staring at the document, because signing it wouldn't just silence me, it would erase the only leverage I had. And not signing it meant stepping into something I wasn't sure I was ready for. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. Just one line. "I need to talk to you. Before this goes any further." I knew who it was before I even read it twice. And I knew that whatever choice I made next would change everything. I didn't reply right away. I left the message unread and set my phone face down on the desk like it might burn me if I looked at it too long. The agreement was still open on my laptop. The cursor blinked at the bottom of the page, waiting for a decision I wasn't ready to make. By the end of the day, legal followed up. They asked if I had questions. They asked if I'd like to discuss revisions. They reminded me the offer was time-sensitive. I asked how much time. They said a week. 7 days to decide whether my silence had price. That night, I listened to her voicemail again, the one I'd deleted but hadn't really deleted. I'd recovered it from the trash folder, like a habit I was ashamed of. She hadn't sounded angry in that one. She'd sounded scared. It didn't excuse anything, but it complicated it. The next morning, I replied to her message. I told her we could talk. I told her it wouldn't be in person. I told her it would be brief. She responded immediately. Too immediately. We agreed on a call that evening. All day, I felt like I was walking around with a secret ticking inside my chest. Meetings blurred together. Words went in one ear and out the other. I kept wondering if legal could see my calendar, if they'd know what I was about to do. At 7:02 p.m., my phone rang. I answered. She didn't waste time. She said she knew about the agreement. She said she knew what they were offering me. She said she didn't blame me for considering it. I asked how she knew. She said people talk. Then she said something that made me grip the edge of the counter. She said legal wasn't done. She said the company was trying to decide whether to sacrifice her completely or spread the damage. She said there were emails I hadn't seen, meetings I hadn't been invited to, decisions made long before she ever touched my performance file. She said she'd been told to handle me. I asked her what that meant. She hesitated. Then she said she'd been encouraged to document concerns early, to protect the team, to be proactive. She said she'd been praised for being decisive. She said when things started spiraling, she couldn't stop. She said if she admitted that now it would ruin her. I asked her why she was telling me this. She said because if I signed the agreement, it would end with her. She said if I didn't, it would end with the company dragging everything out until everyone involved was destroyed. She said we were both being used. She said she wanted to share what she had. I asked her what she had. She said proof. My stomach dropped. She said she'd saved emails, messages, notes from meetings where leadership discussed risk management in relation to me. She said there were directives, subtle but real. She said she could show me. I asked her what she wanted in return. She said she wanted a chance to tell her side before she became the villain in a story bigger than both of us. She said she wanted me not to sign. She said she wanted me to wait. I didn't answer right away. I asked her one question. I asked her if she'd do it again. There was a long pause. Then she said no. I didn't know if that was true. When the call ended, I felt hollow. Not vindicated. Not empowered. Just tired. The next day, legal asked if I'd had any contact with her. They asked it casually, like a check-in. I said no. That was the first time I lied. They reminded me again about confidentiality, about protecting myself, about not complicating things. I nodded and thanked them. That afternoon, an email went out announcing a leadership transition. Carefully worded, bloodless, no names beyond titles, no reasons beyond alignment. The company was closing ranks. That evening, she sent me a file, encrypted, password protected. She sent the password separately. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside were screenshots, emails, calendar invites, conversations I'd never been meant to see, leadership discussing me like a variable, a liability, a potential issue to be neutralized early, language about narrative control, about documenting before perception shifts, messages praising her for handling a delicate situation. This wasn't just her. She hadn't invented the playbook. She'd followed it. I closed the file and sat there, staring at my reflection in the dark screen. If I signed the agreement, none of this would matter. If I didn't, everything would. 2 days later, legal followed up again. They asked for my decision. I asked for a meeting. In person. They agreed. The meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. I didn't tell them I had the files. I didn't tell them I'd spoken to her. I just said I had concerns. As Friday approached, the pressure became physical, not panic. Something slower, heavier. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. At 6 a.m., my phone buzzed. A new message from her. This is your last chance to decide which version of this story survives. I put the phone down and got dressed, because whatever happened in that room later that morning wasn't just going to decide my future. It was going to decide whose truth mattered. I arrived at the legal office early. Too early, really, but I needed the extra time to breathe, to think, to steel myself. The receptionist gave me a polite nod, the kind that says, "You're about to walk into something serious." The room was the same one I'd been in before. Glass walls, thick enough to mute sound but thin enough to feel like everyone outside could see me waiting. Inside, the usual trio, legal, HR, and a senior leadership representative. No her. Not yet. They greeted me and immediately got down to business. This time, the tone was unmistakably firm. They wanted a decision. They wanted it finalized. They outlined the voluntary separation package again, the compensation, the legal protections, the clean exit. I listened, nodded, asked a few clarifying questions, though every answer was designed to reassure me or pressure me, without committing to anything concrete. Then legal slid a folder across the table. "Documents you haven't seen before," one of them said. Inside were emails, internal notes, performance summaries, and meeting minutes. Most of it was familiar, but some of it wasn't. Some of it was damning. Explicit instructions about documenting me, about containing me, about preemptive action. My former friend's name appeared repeatedly, but she wasn't the only one involved. Leadership had approved, HR had noted, and processes had been manipulated at multiple levels. I realized then that I wasn't the only victim. They were all complicit. The system itself was weaponized, and I had been the target. I asked if anyone in the company was being held accountable. They didn't answer directly. Instead, they emphasized confidentiality, that any misstep could trigger litigation, that the company was trying to resolve the matter with minimal disruption. And then the door opened. She stepped in. My former friend, my betrayer, my co-conspirator, depending on how you looked at it. She didn't say hello. She didn't smile. She just walked in, carrying a slim folder of her own. She sat opposite me. She didn't make eye contact. Legal and HR positioned themselves around us like neutral referees. Leadership leaned back, silent. Then she spoke, quietly at first, then with urgency. She admitted things, some truths, some half-truths. She explained pressures, directives from above, fear, panic. She framed her actions as survival, as following a path set by leadership, as a misguided attempt to protect the team. I listened. I stayed calm. I didn't speak. When she finished, she slid her folder toward me. Inside were the same documents she had sent me before, but now there were more emails I hadn't seen, conversations that explicitly directed her to monitor me, notes praising her handling of the risk, references to HR meetings that were staged to build a paper trail. Legal looked at both of us, then at the files. They said they'd reviewed everything. They acknowledged patterns of abuse, misuse of authority, and documented misconduct. But they also reminded us, both, the company still controlled the narrative. Then they asked me a question that made my stomach drop. Given all of this, are you willing to sign the separation agreement? I didn't answer immediately. My eyes stayed on her. She looked at me now, finally making eye contact. There was regret there, fear, but also calculation. "This is your choice," she said softly. "You can end it cleanly, or you can force everyone to be accountable." I realized at that moment that there were no safe options. Signing meant silence, money, and closure, but it also meant letting the system win. Not signing meant dragging everyone through scrutiny, exposing her and the higher-ups, risking retaliation, and possibly burning bridges beyond repair. I leaned back in my chair and breathed, and then I said the words I hadn't dared speak aloud for months. "I'm not signing." The room went still. Legal nodded. HR frowned subtly. Leadership's eyes narrowed, calculating. She flinched, just slightly. For the first time, the power shifted. They told me the company would now escalate the matter to external counsel. that the situation could become public, that I needed to prepare for scrutiny, potential backlash, and procedural delays, that my role could remain secure. But everything about my experience would now be examined under a microscope. She looked at me across the table and whispered, "You're going to regret this." I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because I already knew I wouldn't regret it, not yet. Not until I saw what would happen next. And outside the walls of that conference room, the company was already mobilizing, readying responses, rehearsing statements, and bracing for exposure. I left that day knowing one thing with absolute certainty: the game had changed. And this time, I wasn't playing by anyone else's rules. But as I walked past familiar desks, past colleagues who avoided my eyes, past the empty spaces where she had sat, a sinking thought took hold. The storm was coming, and I had no idea how wide or how destructive it would be. The week after I refused to sign was unlike anything I had expected. People didn't know how to act around me. Some avoided me entirely, like I carried a contagious secret. Others hovered, trying to smile, trying to gauge whether it was safe to speak. Meetings that had once been routine felt tense. Every glance at a Slack ping, every calendar invite, every muted group chat felt like it could be loaded. Legal reached out almost immediately. They scheduled a call to outline next steps. I was told external counsel had been brought in, and that my statements, along with all documents, were being compiled for review. They didn't sugarcoat it. The word litigation came up. Once. Twice. Enough to make my stomach drop. I tried to keep working normally, but normal was gone. Every task felt like it might be scrutinized. Every email I wrote, every report I submitted, I imagined it dissected by lawyers, HR, leadership, even her. It was exhausting. Then came the rumors. I heard whispers that she was claiming I had manipulated her, that I had gone behind her back to make her look bad. Some people believed it immediately. Others looked at me, unsure what to say. I didn't defend myself. I couldn't. Not yet. Legal had instructed me not to discuss anything outside the official channels. I was trapped between self-preservation and watching the narrative twist in real time. One afternoon, a senior manager called me in, not to my usual office, but a small, windowless room. Just the two of us. He didn't mince words. "They're reviewing everything," he said. "The emails, the decisions, the chain of command. You're involved, but this isn't personal, at least not from their perspective. But everyone is nervous. Your former manager is nervous. HR is nervous. Leadership is nervous. Everyone is trying to figure out what's going to happen when this goes external." I nodded. I said nothing. He added, almost in a whisper, "I wouldn't be surprised if there's pushback soon. She's not just going to disappear quietly." That night, I checked my phone. Several missed messages. From her. From colleagues. From people I hadn't spoken to in months. Some were just checking in. Some were veiled warnings. Some were subtle threats disguised as concern. I didn't answer. The next morning, I arrived at work to find an unusual atmosphere. Phones buzzing. Hushed conversations. A sense of anticipation. It wasn't gossip. It was tension. People were bracing for something they didn't want to name. Legal scheduled another meeting. This one included external counsel. They were preparing to present a preliminary report to leadership and HR. My role was clear: witness, informant, key document holder. When I walked into the room, she was there. Not in the same position of power she had been before, but present nonetheless. Her eyes met mine for the first time since the all-hands announcement. No apology, no friendliness, just calculation. The session began with lawyers outlining the evidence collected so far. Emails, meeting notes, statements, internal documentation. Every inconsistency, every questionable decision, every action taken that had affected me was on the table. They asked me to walk through the timeline. I did carefully. Dates, actions, emails sent, meetings attended. I kept it factual, precise, calm. She spoke once, briefly, carefully, claiming misinterpretation, defending her actions, framing her panic as responsibility. She tried to redirect attention, to muddy the waters, but I stayed on track. Legal guided the discussion back to the facts. By the end, there was a tense silence. The lawyers left us for a moment. She looked at me and said, quietly, "This isn't over." I didn't respond. When they returned, they informed us that the review would be escalated further. Recommendations were being drafted for both HR and executive leadership. They emphasized that nothing would happen immediately, that external counsel would review everything before any action was taken. I left the meeting feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. Relief that the documentation and truth were finally being considered. Exhaustion from how slowly and painfully accountability moved. Later that week, I received an unexpected email from a colleague who had quietly observed the situation unfold. "They're scared," it read. "She's scared. Leadership's scared. HR is scared. You don't even know how much you've shaken things. Just be ready. Keep your head down, keep your files, and watch." I realized that for the first time in months, I wasn't reacting. I was observing every action, every word, every slip. I was cataloging it, documenting it, preparing for whatever came next. That night, I opened the folder she had sent me again. Screenshots, emails, notes, meeting records. I compared them to my own documentation. Every single detail aligned. Every misstep, every manipulation, every hidden approval. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. And now I had a choice. I could let it play out slowly, let the company and everyone involved navigate the consequences in their own time. Or I could act. And if I acted, there would be no turning back. I sat there, staring at the screen, knowing that whatever I decided next would change everything. Not just for her, not just for the company, but for me. Because once the next move was made, the game was no longer about survival. It was about reckoning, and I was ready to make it. I woke up the next morning with the weight of the decision pressing on me like a living thing. Every instinct screamed to wait, to let legal handle it, to stay quiet and keep the option of a clean exit open. But every memory of what she'd done, every email, every manipulated meeting, every moment she'd subtly destroyed my work and reputation, it was impossible to ignore. By mid-morning, I had made up my mind. I wasn't signing, not quietly, not without exposing the truth fully. I started organizing everything I had, my notes, emails, screenshots, calendar entries, even internal chat threads. I created a master timeline of her actions, with every documented move, every approval, every manipulation tied directly to leadership knowledge or inaction. It was exhausting, but I didn't stop. I emailed legal, requesting an urgent meeting to present the full timeline. I didn't mention her or her documents in the email. I kept it simple. I have additional information relevant to the ongoing review. Please advise the earliest time we can meet. 2 hours later, they responded. Meeting confirmed for the afternoon. Internal counsel and external counsel. My heart raced, not from fear, but from anticipation. I knew this was the moment everything could pivot. When I arrived, the room was the same as always, but the air felt heavier. HR was there. Leadership was there. External counsel too. And then quietly she walked in. She didn't sit immediately. She lingered near the door, watching me, calculating. Legal asked me to present. I did step by step. No emotion, no embellishment. Just dates, actions, emails, notes, and the approvals attached to them. I went slowly, carefully, ensuring that every fact was documented, every link in the chain of events clear. She watched silently at first. Then she whispered something to one of the lawyers. I couldn't hear it, but I saw her eyes flick to me, calculating, measuring. When I finished, there was silence. External counsel leaned back. Internal counsel scribbled notes. Leadership shifted in their chairs. HR looked tense, like someone had pressed pause on a system they thought was foolproof. Then she spoke. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said, quietly, almost pleading. I followed instructions. I tried to protect the team. I panicked. Legal interrupted. Let's stick to facts, not justifications. Her expression hardened. Then she said, You're making me look worse than I am. I said nothing. Leadership leaned forward. They started asking questions about approvals, about HR awareness, about what documentation existed, about meetings that weren't visible to me. Every answer I gave reinforced the pattern. Every step I had documented matched reality. She tried again, subtly. There were nuances. You're oversimplifying. External counsel shook their head. We're assessing systemic patterns, not interpretations. By the end of the meeting, it was clear. The documents, the timeline, the corroboration, I had them all. The company could no longer pretend this was just a conflict between two employees. As we left the room, legal pulled me aside. They're considering next steps, they said. It's no longer internal. This will likely involve executive review and external assessment. You've presented everything clearly, well organized. This is strong. I nodded. What about her? They know she's implicated. That's why she's quiet. But she's dangerous. Expect attempts to muddy the narrative outside this room. Keep documentation. Don't communicate outside these channels. I left the office feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and empowerment. For months, I had been cornered, manipulated, undermined. And now, finally, I had turned the tables, not by retaliation, not by aggression, but by clarity, by evidence, by truth. That night, I checked my phone. One message. From her. Don't think this ends the way you think. I didn't reply. I knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, it wouldn't just be about her. It wouldn't just be about the company. It would be about the truth and whether the system could survive it. And I realized that for the first time in months, I wasn't scared. I was ready, because the reckoning was coming, and no one, neither her nor leadership nor HR, could stop it. I remember the morning it all came to a head. The office felt different that day, not in the usual tense way, but in a way that made it impossible to ignore. People moved cautiously, voices were lower, and every glance felt loaded. Something had shifted. Everyone knew the storm was no longer approaching. It was here. Legal called me into the conference room early. This time they brought executives I hadn't met before, a few higher-ups from other departments, and HR leadership who had been mostly invisible until now. The air was thick with anticipation. I knew that whatever happened in this room would set the final course of the story I'd been living for months. I opened my folder and laid out everything. The emails, the notes, the chat threads, the calendar entries. I walked them through the timeline again, slowly, meticulously. Every moment she had abused authority, every instance of subtle sabotage, every decision where leadership had stayed silent. It was all there. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't speculate. I just showed them the facts. She sat across from me, quiet at first. Then she started speaking, trying to justify, to explain, to place blame elsewhere. The executives listened, politely at first. Then questions became sharp, pointed, uncompromising. Why wasn't this escalated sooner? Who approved these actions? Where was HR when this began? I answered honestly, directly. I didn't flinch. I didn't hold back. Every piece of evidence she tried to manipulate, I countered with documented proof. For the first time, her careful manipulation and the corporate system that enabled it were laid bare. They asked her to leave the room. She looked at me, eyes wide, almost pleading, but she left without a word. The door closed, and suddenly the room felt heavier, more decisive. Executives discussed quietly among themselves. Legal asked for clarifications, confirming dates, approvals, and patterns. HR finally admitted the failures, not as an apology, but as acknowledgement of what the documentation made impossible to deny. Then one of the senior executives turned to me. "You've done the right thing by bringing this forward," he said. "It's clear that this wasn't an isolated incident. There are systemic issues, and the individual involved has acted beyond the bounds of acceptable professional behavior." I nodded. I felt a strange mix of exhaustion, relief, and disbelief. Months of fear, anxiety, humiliation, and planning had led to this moment. The truth was finally seen, acknowledged, and documented by those with the power to act. She was officially removed from the company later that day. Not quietly this time. Not just a folder in HR's archives. Her departure was formal. Her record reflected the misconduct. Leadership was placed under review. Processes were revised. HR protocols were updated. The ripple effect went far beyond the two of us, and I realized that the consequences extended to everyone who had stayed silent. I returned to my desk, drained. For weeks, I had imagined this moment, the victory, the relief, but the reality wasn't euphoric. It was quiet, tense, real. Justice doesn't always feel like celebration. Sometimes it's just recognition. That night, I reflected on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the manipulation, the fear, the exhaustion, and the eventual reckoning. I thought about my former friend, about the pressure she had described, about the system she had navigated. I thought about myself and how I had survived, how I had chosen to stand my ground, how I had documented every detail, how I had refused the clean exit that would have silenced the truth. I realized something important. This story isn't only about revenge. It's about awareness, about the importance of clarity, of evidence, of speaking up even when it feels impossible, about recognizing that workplaces are messy, that power can be misused, and that accountability often requires persistence, patience, and courage. And I realized that I am stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. I sit here now, months later, knowing that the storm has passed, but the lessons remain. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you stay silent for a clean exit, or would you fight to expose the truth, knowing it could change everything, for better or worse? If this story hooked you, hit that subscribe button for more stories like this. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story from behind closed doors. I still wonder how many stories like mine are happening quietly behind closed doors. And I want to know, what would you do if it were you?